Welcome to our latest Wandering Walks of Wonder walking tour. Today we're headed to Savannah, Georgia. Savannah, Georgia's first city, sits like a jewel across the broad Savannah River. Savannah was founded when General James Edward Oglethorpe and 120 travelers of the good ship Anne landed on a high bluff along the Savannah River in February of 1733. The 13th and final American colony, Georgia, was named after England's King George II, and Savannah became its first city. Savannah played an important role in both the American Revolution and the Civil War, and its downtown area is recognized as one of the largest National Historic Landmark districts in the United States. Our walk begins in front of the Visitor Center, which is a complex of buildings that once housed the Central of Georgia Railway. The building that we see here on our left is the Gray Building. This building is now called Kia Hall of the Savannah College of Art and Design, which will see quite a few of their buildings along this first portion of the walk. This building is the oldest surviving railroad office building in the United States. It was constructed between 1854 and 1856 as the headquarters for the 1833 Central Railroad and Banking Company, later called the Central of Georgia Railway. The Gray Building did duty as a train office for over 130 years, the longest run for any railroad building in the United States. On our right is the Savannah Cultural Arts Center. This is a premier visual and performing arts facility. It serves as a creative meeting space for residents, the local arts community, and organizations to experience, engage with, as well as create art. To our left is Scarborough House. This exuberant Greek Revival mansion, built during the 1819 cotton boom for Savannah merchant Prince William Scarborough, was designed by English architect William Jay. The house boasts a Doric portico capped by one of Jay's characteristic half-moon windows. Scarborough was a major investor in the steamship Savannah, and today his home hosts the Ships of the Sea Museum, stuffed with models of influential vessels. In front of us is the United States Customs House. One of the first things the first United States Congress tackled in 1789 was setting up the Customs Service, the nation's oldest federal agency. Savannah has had a custom house since the beginning when the town was founded, and this is the town's third that was designed in 1848 by New York architect John S. Norris. Savannah City Hall is sited on Yamacraw Bluff, overlooking the Savannah River, where General James Oglethorpe landed in 1733. The government first conducted business here in the City Exchange in 1799, side by side with the post office and the town's newspaper. That building was razed in 1984 and replaced with Savannah's first building constructed specifically as a city hall. Local architect Hyman Wallace Whitcover did the design honors with a proportional Renaissance revival plan, and he had a budget of about $205,000 that included ornate statues of chariots and horses atop the structure that were never built. This beautiful red brick building that we see was once home to the Savannah Cotton Exchange. In 1886, only one seaport in the world was handling more cotton on its docks than Savannah, which handled about 2 million bales a year. Boston architect William Gibbons Preston won a national design competition with a Romanesque-style brick structure to house the bustling exchange. In front of the building is a griffin, which is a winged lion of mythology. It's and the building itself, or the little garden that we see that has the griffin, is a beautiful wrought iron fence with medallions of poets and presidents embedded inside the fence. The building we see with those 6 columns once housed the Hibernia Bank. Louis Montaigne Mowbray and Justin Maximo Eufinger were 2 of America's most successful bank architects with over 400 designs to their credit between 1895 and 1930. In 1912, they created this neoclassical building for Hibernia Bank. We'll take a look at these ironworks as well as look below at the level of the buildings that we see here. And this is known as the Factors Walk. This is a network of iron crosswalks that connect Bay Street with the multi-story buildings that rise up from the river level. There's iron staircases, very historic iron staircases that descend from Bay Street to Factors Walk. This area was originally the center of commerce for cotton brokers who walked between and above the lower cotton warehouses. The cobblestones used in the ramps were originally carried as ballast in the ship's holds. We now get a good look, or a good first look, at the Savannah River, as well as the beautiful Talmadge Memorial Bridge, which is a cable stay suspension bridge that bans the Savannah River between Georgia and South Carolina. As we walk along the river and take a view of what was once the historic, very historic downtown area and commercial exchange for Savannah, we see many of these multi-level buildings here on our right. Most of these at one time were cotton exchange brokers' buildings or warehouses to house cotton. They would sit here right along the river, and as we saw with the factors walk above, had stairways that took us up to the main commercial district, which is along Bay Street. One of the more famous statues along the river here is the Waving Girl statue. This statue was made in honor of Florence Martis. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, Florence greeted the passing ships by waving a cloth during the day, and at night she used a lantern. Some people say she wanted to be the first to meet her husband as he returned to port, but it appears she was just sort of lonely. Florence, the sister of the Tybee Island lighthouse keeper, began waving in 1887 when she was just 19 years old, and she never stopped until 1931 and never missed a ship coming in. She died in 1943 and is buried in Laurel Grove Cemetery. The John Eppinger house that we see here on our right is a federal-style frame house that was built in 1822 for John Eppinger, a city official. This house actually was moved to this spot from West Perry Street, just a little bit of ways. We now begin taking a walk through one of the historic squares in Savannah. There are 22 squares that you'll find, these public places, and on this walk we'll walk through most of them. The first that we're going through is Reynolds Square, which was originally known as Lower New Square. It was laid out in 1734 and later renamed for Captain John Reynolds, the governor of Georgia, in the mid-1750s. The square contains a bronze statue honoring John Wesley, founder of Methodism. Wesley spent most of his life in England, but undertook a mission to Savannah from 1735 to 1738, during which time he founded the first Sunday school in America. Ahead of us is the Lucas Theater. The Lucas Theater was a collaboration in 1921 by Arthur Lucas and architect C.K. Howell. Howell designed theaters across the country, and Lucas owned more than 20 stages throughout the South, though the Lucas Theater in Savannah is the only one to bear his name. Built primarily as a movie palace, the theater also incorporated a stage for road shows. Lucas would drum up business by sending birthday cards to Savannah residents with coupons for free admission. He'd often scour the wedding and birth announcements in the papers and send his own congratulations in the form of free tickets. His promotional efforts paid off, and for the next 40 years, the Lucas Theater became a favorite venue for talking movies, musicals, traveling troupes, reviews, and theatricals. With the advent of television and the population shift to the suburbs, the theater area began to wane. The theater did close in 1976 after a deserted screening of the movie The Exorcist, but a Savannah citizens group began a 14-year, $14 million campaign that culminated in a grand reopening in December of 2000. Ahead of us is the Pink House, and it's hard not to see why that's called the Pink House building. It's now a restaurant, but it is one of the rare Savannah buildings that has its roots that date back to the 1700s. Constructed in 1789 for James A. Habersham Jr., its pink stucco exterior and dignified classical proportions are still evident despite several makeovers to the building. Across the street from the Pink House is the Oliver Sturgis House. This house was built in 1813 by Oliver Sturgis, a prosperous Savannah merchant on the site of what once was the parsonage of John Wesley, minister of the Church of England in Georgia, who lived in Georgia from 1736 to 1737 and was the founder of Methodism. Sturgis owned 40% of the Savannah, the first steamship ever to cross the Atlantic Ocean. The Savannah's historic voyage was hashed out in the Sturgis House, the building that we see today, which is one of a pair of federal-style residences located here. This pioneering high-rise building that we see began life in 1895 as the Citizens Bank, and today is part of the Savannah College of Art and Design, or SCAD. This was the first building in town to be completely fireproof, with beams and supports crafted of iron and the walls and floors sculpted with terracotta and marble. German-born architect Gottfried Norman, who was based in Atlanta, contributed to this Renaissance Revival style building. James Oglethorpe selected this site for the Mother Church of Georgia. This is the third church that has stood at this site, a classical Greek temple design from architect James Cooper. The first minister to the colonists was a Reverend Dr. Henry Herbert, chaplain on the ship Anne. Later ministers included John Wesley and George Whitefield, a fiery preacher and founder in 1740 of the Bethesda Orphan Home. Other firsts at Christ Church include America's first Sunday school and the first hymnal in English, both credited to John Wesley in 1736. We're now walking in Johnson Square, which is named for Robert Johnson, the royal governor of South Carolina, who aided the colony of Georgia when it was being settled. It is the oldest known square in Savannah. And within the square is the Nathaniel Greene Monument, which honors the second-in-command of George Washington during the Revolutionary War. Designed by architect William Strickland in 1825, the cornerstone was set by the Marquis de Lafayette. The monument is made of white marble and stands about 50 feet tall. Across the street from us is the historic Manger Hotel. William Lee Stoddard was an architect who built his reputation raising big city-type hotels in smaller markets. Many times the Stoddard Hotel would be the tallest building in town at the time. This 10-story Stoddard favorite is in the colonial revival style, and it opened in 1913 as the Hotel Savannah. We're now heading into Tilford Square. Originally, this was called St. James Square in honor of a green space in London, England, and it also marked one of the most fashionable neighborhoods in early Savannah. It was renamed in 1883 to honor the Tilfair family. It's the only square in Savannah that honors a family rather than an individual. The Tilfairs included former Governor Edward Tilfair, Congressman Thomas Tilfair, and Mary Tilfair, benefactor of Savannah's Tilfair Museum of Art, which we see right in front of us. Brothers Edward and William Tilfair set sail from Scotland for the American colonies in 1758. Edward headed for Virginia and William aimed for Savannah. Edward shortly migrated to Savannah as well, and the brothers immersed themselves in the mercantile trade. Through the efforts of Mary Tilfair, a daughter of Edward who died in 1875 at the age of 84 and never married, the house was converted into the Tilfair Museum of Art in 1886. Trinity Church is the oldest Methodist church in the city, whose intimate association with John Wesley and George Whitefield makes it a bedrock of Methodism. The cornerstone of this building was laid on February 14, 1848. The edifice of the building, the facade of the building, is of Savannah gray brick, was completed in 1850 and was designed by John B. Hogg in the Corinthian style. Ahead of us is the historic U.S. Post Office building. Despite its bulk, this Romanesque-style government building of Georgia marble and granite from 1895 manages to blend in with its neighbors despite swallowing an entire city block. The upper floors and central tower harken back to the Italianate influences of a slightly earlier time. We're now entering Wright Square, headed towards the Gordon Monument. This was the second square in Savannah, carved out in 1733 and named originally for Lord Percival, who is generally regarded as the man who gave the colony of Georgia its name, which was a tribute to Great Britain's King George II. It was renamed in 1763 to honor James Wright, the third, last, and perhaps most notable of Georgia's royal governors. The square is the burial site of Tomochichi, a leader of the Creek Nation and trusted friend of colony founder James Oglethorpe. When Tomochichi died in 1739, Oglethorpe ordered him buried with military honors in the center of Percival Square. In accordance with his people's customs, the grave was marked by a pyramid of stones gathered from the surrounding area. In 1883, citizens wishing to honor William Washington Gordon, founder of Georgia's first railroad, replaced Tomochichi's monument with an elaborate and highly allegorical monument to Gordon. Gordon's old widow objected strongly to the perceived insult to Tomochichi and led a drive to erect a new monument that was erected in 1899. Ahead of us on our left is the Lutheran Church of the Ascension, led by Pastor John Martin I'm going to get this wrong, Boltzis. Lutherans gathered for the first time on Georgian soil in 1734. George B. Clark designed this building in Norman and Gothic styles in 1879. This yellow brick building that we see in front of us is the Chatham County Courthouse. This courthouse was constructed in 1889 and is based on plans drawn by William G. Preston. Preston used pale yellow brick on the Romanesque government building, which was the largest commission of his architectural career. The building on our right is known as the Lindsay and Morgan Building. This building originally sold carpets and home furnishings from this building in 1921 when it was constructed. It was made also of fashionable Art Deco tiles. But the land around here used to be a burial ground, and the upper floors of that building are said to be haunted. We're now heading into Oglethorpe Square. Originally, this square was laid out in 1742 and called Upper New Square, but was later renamed in honor of Georgia founder General James Oglethorpe. One of the most beautiful homes on this square is the Owens Thomas House. A commission from wealthy cotton merchant Richard Richardson lured Mrs. Richardson's brother-in-law, esteemed architect William Jay, from his home in England to Savannah. Jay arrived just after Christmas in 1817 and stayed until 1824. In that time, he created many architectural masterpieces, and this house is considered the finest example of Regency architecture to survive in the country. Jay used regional tabby, which is a mixture of oyster shells, sand, water, and lime to craft the first floor. Behind the house is the best preserved stable slave quarters in the city, and its tabby walls are original. Miss Meta Thomas, granddaughter of the previous owner, George W. Owens, willed the house to the Tilfair Academy of Arts and Sciences as a house museum, which it continues as a museum today. This is the William Kehoe House. William Kehoe sailed from County Wexford, Ireland in 1842 at the age of 10 with his mother, father, 4 brothers, and 3 sisters. Once in America, Kehoe apprenticed in an iron foundry and worked his way up to become foreman. Eventually, he bought the foundry that was then located to the east of Broughton Street. Kehoe married in 1868 and settled on Columbia Square in this house here. By the 1890s, he was prosperous enough that he constructed this home for $25,000. Over the next 60 years after the family moved out in the 1930s, it was used as a boarding house, funeral parlor, and for a period of time was owned by Football Hall of Famer Joe Namath. This home that we see in front of us is the Isaiah Davenport House. Davenport immigrated from Rhode Island and in 1818 was elected as a city alderman. He completed this house in 1821, which is noted for its sweeping double entrance. Long considered to be the best federal-style house in Savannah, it was threatened with demolition in 1955 until a group of 7 women fought to save it, sowing the seeds for the historic Savannah Foundation and a preservation movement in the city that continues to this day. We're now heading into Columbia Square. Columbia Square was laid out in 1799 and is named for Columbia, the poetic personification of the United States. In the center of the square is a fountain that once formerly stood at Wormslow, the estate of Noble Jones, one of Georgia's first settlers. It was moved here to Columbia Square in 1970 to honor Augusta and Wimberly Doreen, residents of Jones. It's sometimes called the rustic fountain as it's decorated with vines, leaves, flowers, and other woodland motifs. Our next stop on our tour takes us to Colonial Park Cemetery. The Colonial Park Cemetery was one of Savannah's most beautiful restorations. It was established around 1750 as the original burial ground for the Christ Church parish. Among those buried here are Button Gwinnett, signer of the Declaration of Independence. More than 700 victims of the 1820 yellow fever epidemic rest here as well. There are also many victims of Savannah's colorful dueling era buried in this cemetery. Savannah history records the first dueling death in 1740, and the final shot in the name of honor was fired in 1877. The cemetery was already closed to burials before the start of the Civil War, and no Confederate soldiers are buried here. But the war did leave its mark on the cemetery. Federal troops took over the cemetery grounds during their occupation of Savannah, and many of the graves were looted and desecrated. It has been said that Union soldiers changed the dates on many of the headstones. Across the street from the cemetery is what's known as the Mary Marshall Row. We're along East Oglethorpe Avenue now. These 4 brick houses were once within hours of being demolished in 1960 for their valuable Savannah gray bricks and marble steps. The carriage houses had already been leveled when 4 pioneer preservationists moved quickly to buy all 4 houses, helping to establish the viability of the historic Savannah Foundation. One of the early occupants of the newly spared houses was Pulitzer Prize-winning poet and author Conrad Aiken. The Christian Camphor House may be one of the most historic in downtown Savannah. Built between 1760 and 1767, this is thought to be the oldest surviving house in Savannah. The house was raised on its high brick foundation in 1871. The upper story is wood frame, and the roof features two dormers on its salt box roof. The balcony was remodeled sometime after 1907. One of the most visited homes in Savannah is the Juliet Gordon Low House. Juliet Gordon Low, the founder of the Girl Scouts in 1912, was born here on Halloween night in 1860. This elegant townhouse was built for James Moore Wayne, who was mayor of Savannah and Supreme Court Justice, who sold it to Juliet's grandfather, William Washington Gordon, in 1831. This beautiful church is the Independent Presbyterian Church. The original church on this location was designed in 1817 by John Holden Green, who was at the time the most famous architect practicing in the state of Rhode Island. When it was rebuilt in 1891 after a fire, it is believed that William G. Preston replicated its original design. The Independent Presbyterian Church steeple is the tallest in Savannah. Across the street from us is historic Chatham Academy. The Chatham Academy was founded way back in 1788 and opened this building in 1901 as Savannah's only high school. For fans of the movie Forrest Gump, many may recognize Chippewa Square, for it's on this square where the scenes where Forrest Gump is sitting on the bench and talking about his life occurred. The bench is no longer here, it's at the Savannah History Museum, but the entire set was built in this particular square. Chippewa Square was laid out in 1815 and is named in honor of American soldiers killed in the Battle of Chippewa during the War of 1812. Built in 1833, the First Baptist Church is the oldest house of worship in the city. This Greek-style temple has been remodeled and was remodeled well in 1922. One of the most beautiful houses on Chippewa Square is the Eastman Stoddard House. Construction of this Italianate-style house was begun for jeweler Moses Eastman in 1844 and completed for planter John Stoddard in 1847. The building's third story is a 20th century addition, and it has spent much of the past 100 years as commercial property. In the center of Chippewa Square is a statue that honors James Oglethorpe. James Oglethorpe was the founder of Savannah, and this statue was unveiled in 1910. Oglethorpe faces south towards Georgia's one-time enemy in Spanish Florida, and his sword is drawn. Due to the location of the monument, Savannians sometimes refer to this as Oglethorpe Square, although the actual Oglethorpe Square we pass by just sits a little bit to the northeast of here. The Savannah Theater first opened in 1818 and is one of the United States' oldest continually operating theaters. The Savannah Theater opened its door on December the 4th, 1818 with the performance of The Soldier's Daughter. During the 1850s and 1860s, it was sometimes known as the Athenaeum. The original structure suffered severe damage due to a hurricane that hit Savannah in 1898, and it followed an additional remodeling that was done in 1948 following a fire, and that transformed it into its current Art Deco style. This unique building at 307 Bull Street is done in the Spanish Moor style and is an interpretation of the Gothic Revival style. It was built in 1897 and at one point housed an early Ford dealership showroom. Charles Kluski, an Irish architect, designed this elegant antebellum Greek Revival style home for the Sorrell family in 1848. In deference to those hot Savannah summers, Kluski drew plans for the main floor so that all rooms opened onto a shaded veranda. One distinguished member of the Sorrell family was Gilbert Moxley Sorrell, known as Moxley. Young Moxley was a bank clerk in Savannah when the Civil War began. He fought with the Confederates and served as one of General Lee's lieutenants and was wounded 3 times. But by the age of 26, he held the rank of brigadier general. Later, the house was owned by the Weed family. John S. Norris designed this medieval Gothic mansion, which is one of the South's most distinguished of that genre, for cotton merchant Charles Green. It was the most expensive 19th century house in Savannah. Union General William Tecumseh Sherman made this his headquarters when Savannah surrendered during the Civil War. Here he learned that his seventh child, whom he had never seen, had died of pneumonia. Sherman sent the following telegram to President Abraham Lincoln in 1864. "I beg to present you as a Christmas gift the city of Savannah." St. John's Episcopal Church is the next church on our tour. Calvin Otis came from Buffalo in 1851 to supervise the construction of this Gothic revival church. Church records showed that he was paid $100 for drawing the plans, and his total fee came to $400 for this $16,000 church. The tall wooden steeple chimes were spared due to a special plea to President Abraham Lincoln during the Union Army occupation of the city during the Civil War. We're now entering Madison Square. Madison Square was laid out in 1837 and is named in honor of James Madison, the fourth President of the United States. In the center of the square is a statue to William Jasper. Jasper was a soldier in the siege of Savannah. Though mortally wounded, he heroically recovered his company's flag. This Romanesque red brick and molded terracotta fortress-type building was constructed by the Savannah Volunteer Guards for their armory in 1893. And across the street from the armory is the Masonic Temple. This temple with elaborate ornamental pilasters was erected in 1912 for the world's oldest fraternal organization. The Masons' history in Georgia is about as old as the state itself. Freemason James Oglethorpe set up the first lodge in 1734, shortly after founding Savannah. Another Freemason, Hyman Whitcover, provided the ornate design for the building. This was once the home for Andrew Lowe, who was generally regarded as one of the richest men in the city during the mid-1800s. Lowe made his money by shipping millions of dollars of cotton annually to England. He lived in this brick house covered in stucco until his death in 1886. We're now heading into Lafayette Square. This square contains a fountain that commemorates the 250th anniversary of the founding of the Georgia colony. It was donated by the Colonial Dames of Georgia in 1984, as well as all the cobblestone sidewalks that we see. Lafayette Square features a large fountain that is dyed colored green for St. Patrick's Day celebrations. Commissioned by Samuel P. Hamilton in 1873, this is one of the best examples of the French-inspired Second Empire style in Savannah. The exterior brick that we see was once later covered with stucco. Our last stop on our tour here in Savannah, Georgia is the beautiful and historic Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. The twin spires with chiming bells of the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist can be seen all across the city. This, the oldest Catholic church in Georgia, is an 1898 rebuild of the 1876 French Gothic original. The interior, which we'll be going into here in just a minute, is rich with Italian marble, stained glass imported from Innsbruck, Austria, as well as very opulent Persian rugs. Thank you.
Careful brochure highlights the features of the cathedral.
I hope you've enjoyed this Wandering Walks of Wonder tour here in Savannah, Georgia. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and we will see you on our next Wandering Walks of Wonder tour. Take care now. Bye-bye.